أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستنصره وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدًا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا وعظيمنا وحبيب قلوبنا الرسول الكريم المرسل رحمة للعالمين النبي الصادق الأمين محمد المصطفى وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين طاهرين وأصحابه الغر الميامين ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب سبحان ربك رب العزة أما يصفون والسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم When do movements, when do governments, when do laws have the most meaning and impact? The modern mind may still, to some degree, appreciate a strong leader and perhaps some level of cultural trajectory, so to speak. But the modern psyche does not appreciate the feeling of being dictated to. The moment the modern human being feels the pressure of what it senses is aggressive imposition, especially from laws and government, the need to resist and rebel, an emphasis on rebel, the need to resist and rebel swells rapidly from within. Does this rebellion mean that people then choose the appropriate alternative? Not necessarily. It depends a great deal on their education, their social context, and psychological baggage. In Justice Breyer's book on democracy, he said that public acceptance is not automatic and cannot be taken for granted. The court itself must help maintain the public's trust in the court, the public's confidence in the Constitution, and the public's commitment to the rule of law. That's Justice Breyer. It's not automatic, public acceptance. It cannot be taken for granted. It must help the court and the government, in this case the court, must help to maintain the public's trust in the court and the public's confidence in the Constitution and the public's commitment to the rule of law. This is a jurist, one of the great jurists in modern American history, Justice Breyer. And look how he begins the framing of the understanding of how the government in this branch, well, he mentions both the Constitution and he mentions the court and the public trust in the court and the rule of law, but wholesale, in total, he means the government. That the government owes the duty. The government holds the burden. Public acceptance is not automatic and cannot be taken for granted. So public acceptance is based upon the burden in which the government must fulfill for the citizens and gain the trust and confidence. Now, in the year 2024, as we stand in front of the doorstep of yet another American election. An election like all the previous elections in at least the last few decades that will affect the outcomes and the lives of people not only in the United States of America and in this land and territory, but also people all over the world. As the United States of America is the primary hegemony in our world. The decisions that it makes, its culture, its institutions, its finances, its dollar, dictates to a large degree the daily lives of people all over the world. So what does that mean? A seemingly massive responsibility falls upon the people of the United States of America, as they are not only responsible, well, let's test this framing, but I'm going to say it this way anyways. They are not only responsible for their country, the United States of America, and the policies that dictate and govern life in the United States of America, but by extension, because of the hegemony, they are also then responsible for the rest of the world. But Justice Breyer reminds us that the public trust and public acceptance, whose burden is it? The jurist is the one that has to determine the burden. Anyone who has studied American law, burden of proof is something that comes up over and over again in criminal law and tort law. With whom lies the burden? Justice Breyer tells us it is the government and the institutions that regulate and uphold the rule of law. Let's for a moment look at American culture. Comparing 2024, the American culture, and the feelings towards the government, to several decades ago, 3 or 4 decades ago, or even 5 decades ago, Kennedy's time, or even before. What has happened to American culture? Is American culture more trusting and more accepting of the idea of government? Look at the right. The right has moved on from political niceties, political correctness, public acceptance, unity and unification. And unfortunately, by definition, it has moved towards fascism. It makes me sad to say that. I have some friends that identify as right-wing people, and when I coexist with them and live amongst them, I try to move aside these matters and focus on human beings, because I still try really hard to connect with human beings in a hope that that human connection can help cast doubt into that rising fascism. But what is it about the American culture? Why has it headed in this direction? American culture used to pride itself as being moral, as being upright, even when they made mistakes. American culture tried its best to justify or explain why what America is and was doing was not meant to cause harm, was not meant to cause division, and was not meant to lose public acceptance. But we have come this way nonetheless. And I'll share the conclusion of this khutbah at the outset so that you can follow the thinking. Democracy. Oftentimes in Islamic terms, when we want to think about democracy, the word shura and the surah of shura is invoked to suggest that there is a collaboration or a cohesion or a connection between the concept of shura and democracy. I ask you, in 2024, is this a country of shura any longer? I'm not asking you about whether England or countries in Europe or other Western democracies are shura. They matter, but they do not dominate the world the way the United States does. They do not dominate the world. Shura. What is shura? The word comes from and is related to the process of bees which gather pollen and produce honey in their hive or their cave. They use that honey to store up food for the winter and from when bees are not active. This may sound familiar to you if you've listened to the halaqas on Surah Ash-Shura. And it is also related thus to the word of extracting the honey from the hive. That process is also related. Shara is the word, is related to shura. And in this entire dynamic, the vision and the visual experience that one has when hearing the word shura is this Quranic reality, this amazing reality where God is all encompassing in His dominion and in His planning and in His creative ability and expression. And He creates human beings and, for example, cattle, as Surah Ash-Shura talks about. And through you, He multiplies you. يَضْرَأُكُمْ فِي لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. Immediately then He reminds you that Allah is unlike anything. But He likens you to cattle. He puts you on the same plane as cattle. And He shows the similarity between you, human beings, and cattle, who multiply, 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 multiply. It's part of the process of creation. But what sets apart you and cattle? Back to our honey and the bees. Please review this surah. This is an advertisement, really, for the illumined tafsir of this surah. Back to the bees. The bees are instructed by Allah. They have been given a command, an amr, and they fulfill that command, and they do not allow any sort of division to overtake their single-minded effort. They fly out from the nest, they collect the pollen, they cross-pollinate, they do all kinds of biological wonders, and then they return and they communicate through dance, and they store, and I'm not a scientist, so they do all of these things. Look it up. And in the process, it produces something pure and lovely. You know the difference between human affected honey from pure honey. You can taste the difference. It's a world of difference. It's a world of difference. And it's quite hard to ask someone to go back to human-infested honey when you've had the pure taste of honey. Nothing compares to that. Look at the communal nature. Every person, every individual in that hive acts individually in concert and produces something beautiful not only for its hive, produces sweetness not only for its hive, but also for humanity, and I'm sure probably other creation. I'm sharing with you this conclusion so that we can review this conclusion at the end. The psychology of the lack of shura. I see the destruction of the right wing, all abandon of morality as a result of lack of shura. Human beings have been neglected by this government and by this system. They have not been given dignity, and now they have been preyed upon by wolves, political wolves, who are taking advantage of the feeling of disempowerment by the average American citizen and casting their ire towards the other out of fear and out of hope. Out of fear because they need to recast the direction in which the human being is looking at their disempowerment away from the right wing and from the government as a whole, and instead cast it towards the rival party and towards others, and those others are formed as an enemy on the basis of their otherness to whiteness. Even when they let in the brown man, they denigrate them on camera. And the brown man, being totally disempowered, laps it up and doesn't defend himself. Like you remember that white supremacist lady destroyed Vivek Ramaswamy and said, "I would never let somebody like you, brown Indian man, take control of my life." Despite all of the concessions that he has made to achieve proximity to power, despite all of that, I can't remember her name, that blonde lady, absolutely ruined his dignity and his self-worth, if he had any of it. And he didn't even stand up for himself as an Indian American, really. I don't know if Indian Americans stood up for Vivek Ramaswamy after that. Obviously, it's probably pretty difficult, given the fact that a lot of people don't like Vivek Ramaswamy and his principles. So now we've spoken about the culture of the right wing and how the right wing has preyed upon human beings through the fear and through their disempowerment and through their lost dignity, and has given them a sense of not direction. There's no real policy. There's no real philosophy. It's just anger. And those of you who know, fear leads to anger, and anger leads to hate, and hate leads to suffering. If you had a good education, you know what I'm talking about. So, that's the right wing. The left wing. What is the left wing? The liberal. The American liberal was supposed to be the bastion of freedom and morality in this country that didn't allow for private corporatization to involve itself into the process and to stir up trouble and division so that it could make more money. But that is now long gone. And it's an old story that everybody has ad nauseum now learned about. Now, what about us other people in the United States? Us Muslims. You know, when you become Muslim, you enter this sphere of otherness and brownness. For years, we've been desensitized to images of humiliation, of trauma, and death inflicted upon black and brown bodies by the American government through its military and other hegemonic apparatuses. Muslims in America have thus borne the burden of strategic voting, balancing the needs of Muslims in America and internationally, as well as what is best for the country, the United States, and its most vulnerable citizens. But now, after a year of witnessing a brazen genocide, virtually with our own eyes, Muslim Americans are now at a terrible crossroads. We're at a terrible crossroads. And you all know what I am talking about. On the 5th, we need to cast a vote. I guess you could just not cast a vote. But a decision needs to be made about voting. And it's problematic that I'm up here now speaking to you the Friday before. And it's also problematic that in order to prepare for that, I had to listen to hours and hours and hours of arguments from people on the right wing, from people on the left wing, and people voting third party. I mean Muslim arguments for these hours I spent in preparation. And I'm sure you also have done the same. But look at this reality for a second. Let's just zoom back out. Let's do what the Quran does. It pans in, and then it pans out. And then it centers on something personal. And then it pans out from God's view. And then it pans out to see God's view. And then it zooms back in. Whichever angle you choose to look at our circumstances on November 5, and indeed before November 5, somehow or another, we Muslims are viewed as blameworthy. Think to 9/11. It was our fault, and we were denied any semblance of innocence. Bill Clinton today tells us that the genocide and ethnic cleansing of Gaza is our fault too, because Palestinians dare resist, and us Muslims who are upset, essentially what he was saying is, I know you're upset, but you supported Palestinians' rights to resist. Yes, Clinton wants us to understand that Palestinian resistance is both responsible for dead Israelis and death and destruction in the Gaza Strip, both simultaneously. Meanwhile, Israel is responsible for nothing. That is what the Democratic Party believes. That's mainstream Democrat thinking. Israel is ultimately responsible for nothing. How many times have you seen that press secretary? Well, we'd like to see blah, blah. We'd like to see a little bit more, less damage. Well, we don't want to see any deaths. Well, we don't want to see any destruction. Well, we don't want to see any disease or famine. We don't want to see it. In fact, we'll just not see it at all. And we'll assign all of the blame to you Muslims, just like we've done since September 11th, 2001, and before possibly, but we're just talking about, big moments in Muslim American history. Since then, we've just been blaming you for anything and everything at any time we want. You can run to the right wing and do your little dance. Doesn't work. You can run to the left wing and do your little dance, and they'll cloak it in some sort of weird, empathetic, no, let him speak. No, let him speak. After arresting the hell out of us for months on end, when it got too bad, we have to, now it's getting too close to election season. We have to show that somehow we're not as fascist as the Republican Party is fascist. So therefore, it's just kind of funny. I can't even really make the argument for you. I don't know how they're making the argument. They just trail off. I am speaking now is the way that they're dealing with you. I am speaking now. As you can tell, I'm very upset. And I've been trying very hard not to be upset all the time, every time that I see you. Or you see me, rather. Unfortunately, I don't see you. I feel much better when I see you. Meanwhile, Israel is responsible for nothing. Despite this, the Democratic Party and liberals in this country expect us also to be responsible for saving this country from Donald Trump. Should I review what I said? I know it's really hard to follow. It's our fault September 11th happened. It's our fault we didn't get our extremists into order. It's our fault that October 7th happened. It's our fault that Gaza happened. It's our fault that genocide happened. That they won't say it's a genocide, but ultimately the death and the destruction and whatever, all of the big Ds are our fault, all of it. But it's also, so we have to take responsibility for Al-Qaeda, for Salafi Islam, for Saudi Arabia, for Iran, for racist tropes from frightened, racist America. We're responsible for all of that. We're responsible for not making you feel comfortable enough. We're responsible for being so impressive as lawyers and doctors and engineers and performers and dancing and making jokes and making movies. We're responsible for all of that. And still, after all of these decades, it's still our fault. October 7th is still our fault. The suffering of the Palestinians is still our fault. We're talking about the Democrats here, who want your vote. The right wing doesn't really expect your vote. We're one of the others. But they have a laugh anyways when they bring us on stage. The same way they have an open laugh at Latinos in this country. They are mocking you to your faces. We, brown folk, we, other folk in this country are being openly mocked. And we have no power. How many times did CNN repeat the rapes and the beheaded babies, and babies in ovens, and a family. One of them lost an eye was pulled out, and one of them a tooth was pulled out, and one of them their breast was removed, and one of them their finger was, it's like a weird Aesop's fable tale. I mean, no sir, I promise we didn't do it. I promise I don't like that. We are being openly mocked. I told myself I wouldn't shout. But how am I supposed to deliver this sermon? I didn't ask to deliver this sermon. Wallah al-Azim, I don't want to deliver this sermon. I have to hold back my vomit for the hours leading up to the sermon in order to deliver it. Ya Allah. No, we're responsible for all of that, and we are responsible for saving democracy, for everyone who is openly mocking us, ignoring us to our faces, ignoring us to our faces. I told some of my friends here, recently I went to breakfast with a family, a Muslim family, and they say, the waitress says, "Are there any dietary restrictions?" "Yes, but one, please, no pork in our food. We don't want to have to keep sending our food back and having you do, please, no pork in our, we can definitely take care of that, there's no problem." And what happens when they bring the small child at the table, her pancakes? Bacon, lots and lots of bacon. And you may think to yourself, oh man, come off it. Why are you overreacting about every last thing? Because we haven't reacted to anything. We have no bark and we have no bite. They are ignoring us to our face. They go through the protocol of mocking you by pretending that they see you even. And then they throw the bacon on the thing and put it in. And that's just people who are being absent-minded. What about the people who are thinking? The people who are thinking is Bill Clinton. It's Kamala Harris. I know that you have a restriction on not wanting bacon, but you're going to eat it anyways. And you're going to have to do it, because if you don't eat the bacon, then Donald Trump is going to do X. Therefore, you are responsible for saving American democracy. Oh, okay. So, can I ask a question? Let's save American democracy, folks. We go and vote for Kamala Harris, and we save American democracy. Are we going to get a pat on the back? Are we going to be invited to the White House? Anybody going to thank us? What's the reward for being a good boy? What's the bone that they're going to throw? You can't say it, right? It's not an arms embargo. It's not a phone call to Netanyahu. It's not an end to the war. Every time she talks about ending the war, she says, bring the hostages back. Every single time. Yeah, and it has to end. Bring the hostages back. For a second, there was a, oh, maybe now that Sinwar is dead, the war can end. And then, they're like, whoa, 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 that's the wrong messaging. The right messaging is, bring the hostages back. Which it seems that Netanyahu does not want to do. I don't want this to be an Al Jazeera political analysis sermon. No, America will not thank Muslims. They will not do anything meaningful for our cause. Rather, we only carry a negative responsibility, folks. Vote for Harris, or else we will blame the collective failure of American culture and American society and the American nation on you Muslims, as we've been doing since at least September 11th. And when the right-wing administration comes after you, we will patronizingly tell you, "We told you so. We told you so." And will they lift a finger to help, despite having the lion's share of the power and influence in this country? No. They'll say that we had the lion's share of the power and influence in this country, and we burned it up not voting for the Democratic Party. Nonetheless, a vote for Harris carries another risk: the ire of the Muslim community in the United States and around the world. And I don't need to explain why. A lot of it is evident in what I'm saying, and a lot of it is evident in all of the things. I know that our followers are very well read and stay up to date with the news. They know the arguments. But Muslims who vote third party have been constantly and consistently attacked by other Muslims. By other Muslims who are firm in their conviction that it is political naivete or reckless abandon that is driving this logic. This is a picture of very serious division and animosity, both from within and without, even further fracturing and alienating for an already deeply battered people. Mehdi Hasan has been a journalist for over a decade. I don't know how long now. And he's done a lot of good. Mehdi Hasan has. A lot of good. And I've admired him for his courage and his speaking ability and his prowess and not backing down, and his rigor in his research, and his example of excellence and being a trailblazer within the media reality that's really, really hard to break into, especially as a brown Muslim man. Though I've disagreed a lot with his posturing in this last year, especially over the summer, and his support with a lowercase s for the Democrats, because we have to be fair to Mehdi. He's not supporting the Democrats because he likes them. Not when you really listen to him. Maybe when you're writing an angry tweet, you can just essentialize it to that. But he's been very critical of Biden and Harris's administration, and of Democrats generally. In fact, Mehdi is not afraid to put the iron or the sword or the fire to the feet of pretty much any guest that he has. He doesn't play softball usually with them, with the exception of, maybe AOC recently or Ilhan Omar or people like that. But again, it's because of what I assume is a fear that under Trump we will suffer. Now, I don't align with Mehdi on this, and I've been very frustrated with him. But I noticed something the other night. When he got attacked on CNN, to me it was tantamount to a hate crime. When he got attacked, racially abused, Islamophobically abused by that disgusting man and said, well, I hope your beeper doesn't go off, I gasp. I didn't think that I would be shocked by this sort of thing anymore, but I gasped and I felt a pang of pain in my chest. I felt a deep violation. It disgusted me to my core. It shocked me. It scared me. It frightened me that we can be mocked even to our faces on national television. At that point, Mehdi Hassan was me and I was Mehdi Hassan. And I was very sad to see that people, commentators in the world, mostly on obviously social media, kind of laugh at him, kind of mock him a little bit, say, see, that's what you get. But you know, I'm not really sure that other minority groups do that to each other. The Israelis and Jews in this country, and I use the word Jews respectfully, have each other's backs, even when they politically don't align, even when they religiously don't align, even when they socially don't align. An attack on a Jew is an attack on Judaism and all Jews in world Jewry. Only the really brave Jews, a small minority, maybe it's not small, I don't mean to be reductive, still have the decency and the moral courage to stand up for what's right. But we're talking بشكل عام, in general. No, this made me very, very bothered. This frightened me. And it made me think more about Surah Ash-Shura and about the bees who work in concert, in unified action. I don't know if bees have petty disagreements. Maybe they do not. Maybe they do not have that much personality. Maybe they don't have anything other than what God has encoded in them. But there has to be a reason that there is an entire surah named after them. There has to be a reason why this word in particular is used by God Almighty. Look at our fractured state. We have pro-Stein, pro-third-party Muslims. We have pro-Harris Muslims. We have pro-Trump Muslims. And we have the age-old, apathetic Muslim anarchist who never really cared about anything because they were so disenfranchised that they just continued in their disassociative states. Look at the fractures and look at how the fractures have become inflamed and enraged at one another. Are we going to survive this election as Muslim Americans? Let's hope for the best. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم وأسأل الله يستجب لكم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. So I mentioned to you Surah Ash-Shura, and we talked about the word Shura and its meanings. Let's have a quick overlook at Shura and some important signposts to stop at, very briefly. Shura acknowledges God's plan for diversity in creation, but tells us that ultimately, after judgment is meted out, there will only be two camps. The people of heaven, there will be two firqas, there will be two sects, so to speak. One will be in heaven, and one will be in the fire. The people of heaven will be those who heeded the divine guidance through the prophets, and the people of hell will be the misguided who rejected the message of guidance. But the core of the message has always been the same. So what caused the people of Noah, Abraham, Moses, and Jesus to reject or stray away from pure guidance? My language is summarizing verses and repeating them in English in a way that is intelligible. Obviously, there are specific words in here that are very important. Shar'a lakum, that God has ordained upon you as a sharia. What has been given, what was ordered upon, what was the wasi that was given to Nuh and Ibrahim and Musa and Isa. Just for those who know the surah, I'm not unaware. وَمَا تَفَرَّقُوا إِلَّا مِن بَعْدِ مَا جَاءَهُمُ الْعِلْمُ بَغْيًا بَيْنَهُم. So, and they did not become firqa. They did not split, and they did not disagree and become parties or become sects, opposing sects, until after the time that the revelation had come to them. بَغْيًا بَيْنَهُمْ. بَغْيًا بَيْنَهُمْ. Most translations say بَغْيًا as rivalry. That rivalry came amongst them and split them apart. Before it, they were joined on the message of pure divine guidance, of morality. But what is the baghi that came and caused the fracture? It was because of their egos and own immoralities, major fracturing disagreements that ensued in resulting in sects and major divisions. Thus, the purity of the original message becomes compromised and is, for the most part, lost. What then follows is a form of inherited tribalism. Essentially, I am essentializing Islamic history and the development of sects and theologies and schools of thought. One simply believes what they believe because they inherited it from their parents or their community. What they do not do, oftentimes, what they do not do is return to the ethical core to judge the truth for themselves within the context of diversity. This is a clear warning to Muslims. Beware of infighting and tafraqa. And tafraqa on the point and the purpose of falling away and astray and deviating what was dictated to the great prophets like Noah and Abraham and Moses and Jesus, because it's the same core message that repeats itself over and over and over. And it must do that so that it becomes obvious what the core message is. But if it's not obvious to you what the core message is, and everyone is giving a different answer, what do you think that means? That means that the honey has been corrupted. That means that the bees are not working in concert. That means that the hive that they were given to protect has been recklessly abandoned. And negligence, if we want to be nice about it, has ensued. And maybe if we want to continue to be nice about it, some of the truth got diverted and segmented and fractured into small slices upon which certain schools of thought in Islamic theology and history and law have held on to. As a result, nobody really knows where to go for the right answers. Even when it comes to the Quran, they cannot read the Quran and achieve the right answers. Why? Because we're stuck in the state of fractured tribalism. And you simply take what your father told you. And it makes sense because you don't want to be disrespectful to the previous generation. You don't want to be an egotistical young person who shows up all of a sudden and has all the answers. And so you listen to the previous generation. But Allah is at the top of this. Allah is at the top of this. We cannot override our relationship and our duty. وَصَّى بِهِ نُوحًا وَإِبْرَاهِيمَ. They cannot override that duty for the sake of a tribal thinking and reality of their people, or even of the people that they are warning them. And therefore it says, فَلَا تَتَّبِعَ أَهْوَاءَهُمْ. Do not give in to their hawa. Translate that how you will. Do not give in to their whims. Do not give in to their thinking and their logic. You are responsible to Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala. So God puts up with this very serious division out of His benevolence and His incredible mercy. Because as He says in the surah, if I wanted to make you one ummah, I could. And He says this verse directly after the verse in which He says there is two camps. فَرِيقٌ فِي الْجَنَّةِ وَفَرِيقٌ فِي الصَّعِيرِ. The firqa, the group that belongs to heavenly guidance, and the group that belongs to fiery misguidance and hell. And if He wanted, He could put all of you into hell. Yes, it is not only about diversity, but God is saying, if it wasn't for my benevolence, if it wasn't for the fact that I hold on to my promises to give you a chance to think, to make a few mistakes, to crawl and fall and stand up, then fall, then take a few steps, then fall, then push each other, then fall, then rip the plants as you walk around as a child and fall and spit on the anthill and kill the bee and kill the ant. Until maybe when you hit 40 years old, you start to realize, oh my God, I was so destructive. Astaghfirullah. I was so destructive. Why did I incline to so much destruction? And Allah puts up with all of that. Murdering His creation left and right without thinking about it. He puts up with all of that. If He wanted to make you one ummah, He could wipe you all out right now. Don't think that it's your pragmatic thinking regarding this election that's going to save this country. No, Allah has prevented this country from destroying itself yet. And don't get it twisted. In the surah itself, it will tell you, Allahu alladhi anzala al-kitaba bil-haqqi wal-mizan wa ma yudrika la'alla as-sa'ata qareeb. Wow! Allah says, Allah is the one who has revealed and has brought down onto you the kitab, the revelation, bil-haqqi wal-mizan. Bil-haqqi wal-mizan. Those of you who had listened to my previous khutbahs may remember that I think, for me, mim is haqq wal mizan. Anzala al-kitaba bil haqqi wal mizan. And you don't know. Perhaps the hour is near. Whoa. You may wonder why I'm reacting so to this verse. You don't know, perhaps the hour is near. Allahu alladhi anzala al-kitab bil-haqqi wal-mizan. Which means what? All of these calculations that you think you can put off the responsibility for enacting justice and institutions of justice to put it on layaway. We'll get around to it later. But for now, we must survive. Why did you think you have that right? You thought your responsibility is to survive? يَضْرَأُكُمْ فِي. Allah is the one that is multiplying you like cattle. And if you are concerned with multiplication, you are no different than cattle, respectfully to cattle. You are no different to the logic of cattlehood, of chattelhood. Not on the level of ulul azm. Not on their level. You don't come close to the dust on their sandals to then call yourself Muslim if your thinking is cattle-like. No, the Muslim is bee-like, and it thinks, and it works in concert, and it has courage to leave the hive and to travel and to risk personal sacrifice for the fact that if it doesn't bring back, and if enough of him and her, bees, whatever, don't bring back what is necessary for the hive to survive, they have failed. And guess what? They will die trying. If you get in their way, they will sting you. They don't wait around for a group to come. They don't wait around for CNN to say, we have taken him out. We really don't like this kind of language. When they, same anchor, empowered these lies and never apologized, they sting because they have dignity from Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala. And they have been sent by God to do this holy task. Look at the difference. Look at how your theological outlook matters. Yes, in the arguments, you can say, oh, all of these imams are invoking Islamic principles to shame us because of our thinking. Well, if their invocation of thought is not strong enough, then yes, you win. But I challenge you, not with my thought, but with this thought. Is this religious manipulation? I look forward to your response, my brother. Yes, know that confusing people about God and His values is an extremely grievous harm, and it is incredibly destructive for the succeeding generations. Oh, Muslims, what is it that you're leaving behind for your generation that follows you as an irs? What is it that they are receiving as an inheritance? Deviation and misguidance and fracturing? Or an insistence on returning back to the ethical core? Reverse engineering is destroying us. You come to a conclusion first, based on your whim, based on what feels right to you, based on what makes you feel most safe. But that belongs to the cattle-like thinking, because cattle simply wants to survive to multiply. That's not your job. And Allah says at the end of the surah, He says, some of you I arrange for you to reproduce, and some of you I arrange for you to not be able to reproduce. It's up to me whether you can even do it or not. And all you are consumed with is this reality of, I just sprouted out another one. Yay, this is so great. Let's focus all of our time and thinking about who I'm going to marry. Let's think about all of this time about this kind of thing. I'm not trying to downplay the difficulty of being lonely. I'm not. I know it's a very serious problem for our community. But I also want us to think about how we are being distracted. And perhaps if we lived in a society of shura, the honey that was produced, or the offspring that was produced from these relationships, could at least lead to further relationships and further reproduction of a pure message. Not further destruction and tafraqe. فَلِذَلِكَ, and therefore, call people to this faith, stand firm by the moral code which God has decreed, and do not follow whims, and say that I believe in the revelations that God has sent. The Prophet's charge is to treat human beings with justice. He is not a warden over them. God is. My God and your God is Allah. I have my deeds and you have yours. There is no arguments between us, and ultimately we will all be gathered and judged by God. We must balance our friendship and our responsibility. Our friendship to one another, but also our responsibility to the purity of this message. لا أسألكم عليه أجرا إلا مودة في القربى. The Prophet is told and instructed to say that I ask you for nothing other than nearness of kin, kinship amongst you, amongst your families, a loving relationship, a caring relationship, and a caring relationship sets us straight when we're going astray. So, what about this? I'd be remiss to miss these. Astaghfirullah. Verses 36 to 39. God will greatly reward those who believe and put their trust in their Lord, who shun major immoralities and forgive when they are angry. Those who answer to God's call and prayer consistently, whose matters and affairs are subject to shura, who spend their money, and those who, when they are wronged, defend themselves. Defend themselves. They are not brutally mocked in front of an entire nation for one night or 20 years. They bite back. Eventually they sting. Eventually they sting. My friends, I'm sorry for taking up so much of your time, but you know what? This is really important. Shura is a dynamic that produces goodness, honey, sweetness. Bees produce this honey by this meticulous mutual cooperation. But on a societal level, we're angry at each other. How do you help control this anger at a social level? Through the mechanism and the mechanisms of shura. Feeling heard and feeling that one matters and feeling protected and feeling part of a group. If shura is neglected, what we get on a societal level will be the fracturing of God's message and the breaking of communities into divided sects full of anger and blame for one another. But if you have shura, suddenly you will have equitable spending to the benefit of all. Look at this verse 39. وَالَّذِينَ إِذَا أَصَابَهُمُ الْبَغِي هُمْ يَنْتَصِرُونَ. Baghi again shows up. Remember, what was it that split off the generations that were together, that were unified by the message of Allah? بَغِيًا بَيْنَهُمْ. The baghi amongst each other, against each other. And baghi, we said, was the immorality or the attack or the injustice. Immorality, injustice, departure from the pure message of morality. And it caused fractures and divisions and rivalry amongst one another, such that it cracks open and splits the pure truth of guidance. If injustice befalls them, they have the means to address the injustice. وَالَّذِينَ إِذَا أَصَابَهُمُ الْبَغِي هُمْ يَنْتَصِرُونَ. When the moment of the infraction, when the moment of the laceration, when the moment of the damage, when the moment of the musibah comes, they have what it takes, the structures necessary to address the injustice. If you build a society where you can suffer injustice and there is no means of redress, then you have violated the Quranic command for shura. And thus, tafraqa, division. Shura is necessary for addressing injustice, and spending equitably is also necessary, and they go hand in hand. Weak and undeveloped institutions of law are blasphemous, is what the Shaykh says. Blasphemous. Perhaps we lose the institutions, but as long as we don't lose the crucial principle, we can hold on to hope. And the verses that follow. The recompense for an ill deed is another deed proportional to it. But the one who forgives and repairs, their reward is with God. The way of blame is only with those who oppress humanity. So I ask you now, by the Quran standard, what did Bill Clinton and the Democrats want you to think? It's all your fault. If you resist and you take the right step and you take something that hurts, you do the horrible thing of standing up and resisting and risking your life and risking your safety and your community's safety, you are to blame for the outcome. You are to blame for the oppression. You are to blame for the genocide, is what they want you to say. But Allah says, the way of blame is only with those who do the oppression. So if I vote according to فَاسْتَقِمْ كَمَا أُمِرْتَ and steadfastly stand up for the moral code in which I ordered you, and do not give in and follow to their caprice and to their logic of whimsicalness, is the way of blame on me if Trump destroys this nation? Answer the question for yourselves. Subhanallah. Razi says, this is a great principle in jurisprudence, this proportionality. This is also in the tafsir, and it's too good not to say it. This is a great principle in jurisprudence. This recompense for an ill deed is with an ill deed like it. Proportional. When you organize society, every offense must be addressed in proportion to the offense. If there is no ability to address the offenses in the first place, justice would be lost, and thus aggression and injustice would spread. Similarly, if you punish offenses in disproportional excess, that is injustice and is unacceptable to Sharia. Wow! What a man! What a tradition! What a tradition to be broken up with! What a tradition! And in these last few weeks, or last, all of these videos that Sheikh Fulan and Fulan put out, good for them, they're trying to take the right side. But you don't have the equipment. The equipment is here. A lot of them cited this maxim, الضرار الأشد يزال بالضرار الأخاف. right? But they didn't cite that example because they went to the tradition to think about it that way. What that essentially means is the greater harm is removed by the lesser harm. So what happened to the modern Muslim psyche? The modern Muslim psyche only thinks through the lens that is imposed on it. And the lens that's imposed on it is the lesser of two evils. The Democrats ultimately are saying we are the lesser of the two evils. Yeah, maybe we have our faults, but ultimately Trump is the Akbar Shaitan that is going to destroy us all, blah, blah, blah. But I am the Asghar Shaitan, I am the smaller Shaitan that, it's fine. You can continue living and make whatever. Well, this framework, whether we want to say it's a good maxim to use or a bad maxim to use, let's just assume that it's a good maxim that works. The framing of the lesser of the two evils, removing the greater evil by choosing the smaller evil, the framing is wrong. If your framing is the greater evil to be removed as Donald Trump and must be replaced with Kamala Harris, this is the wrong framing. And that is the framing that belongs to a fractured people who don't have a relationship to their scripture, who do not fastaqim kama umirt. That's the type of thinking. No, the one that goes back and reads Razi realizes that the real framing, if you must use this maxim, the real framing is the great harm is not only genocide, but the inability to address genocide. The inability to address genocide. Allah in Surah Al-Baqarah says that fitna is worse than killing. And fitna is the refusal and the failure to address injustices that have occurred. And it compiles and compounds and compounds and compounds. And if you don't go to task with that injustice, then you cannot talk to me about the lesser or the greater of two evils. Your framework is off. The lesser evil, in this case, the lesser evil is the price and the pain and the suffering in solidarity with other human beings that will be necessary to investigate the possibility to address harms, musibah, like genocide, like occupation, like colonization. And those are the worst of things. But we could get all of them out of the way. But we cannot move past genocide. If you live with genocide, what is lower than genocide? You are now accepting lower than the lowest level goes. I'm at the end. In my previous khutbah, the American-Israeli-Arab axis, I was sharply critical of sectarian irrationality precisely because it destroys the purity of God's guidance and allows external asab al-baghi, to lead to baghyan baynahum. Asab al-baghi is the trauma, the external trauma of injustice that comes to you from the external, it decks you in the mouth, and then you start fighting amongst each other. And you don't have the instruments. You don't have the instruments. وَالَّذِينَ إِذَا أَصَابَهُمُ الْبَغِي هُمْ يَنْتَصِرُونَ. You don't have the instruments to respond and address and defeat that baghi, that rebellious, disgusting attack upon you of injustice. Instead, you break each other down, thus violating shura and destroying our ability to address and defend against oppression, external and internal. Perhaps you may have even noticed a common thread. In most of my sermons, I repeatedly speak about the need for unification and for mass action driven by moral unison in order to gain God's favor and support. Concerted action and effort are rewarded in our realm of existence. This is simply one of God's sunnahs in creation. But concerted effort and action based on belief and dedication to morality has the potential. Concerted effort and action based on belief and dedication to morality has the potential to fell despots and raise civilizations in their place. We are constantly working backward, O Muslims. We begin with the conclusion and then use the clever arguments to bolster the conclusion. However, the process of shura protects us from the pitfalls of reverse engineering. Instead, we begin with the moral principles which God has gifted to us through revelation. It is up to us to protect the purity of the honey that drips from revelation. If we fracture based on choosing anxiety over moral unison, the process is poisoned. Think back to the word shura. If the bees are fractured into opposing rivaled sects, they will not be able to work together to produce honey, which is then extracted benefits the hive and all of creation. So do what you will. To us our deeds, and unto you your deeds. Allah will gather us on the final day, the day in which there is no doubt any longer, and unto Him is the path and our return. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. ربنا إننا سمعنا مناديا ينادي للإيمان أن آمنوا بربكم فآمنا ربنا فاغفر لنا ذنوبنا وكفر عنا سيئاتنا وتوفنا مع الأبرار ربنا وآتنا ما وعدتنا على رسلك ولا تخزنا يوم القيامة إنك لا تخلف الميعاد ربنا يا ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب وصل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وأقم الصلاة.